In 1986, the world watched as Chernobyl became a word synonymous with catastrophe. A reactor exploded. Radiation spread across Europe. The Soviet Union scrambled to contain what they called an accident. We were told it was human error, a safety test gone wrong, operators who pushed the reactor past its limits. The official story has held for decades now. But what if that's not the full story?
Anatoly Dyatlov was the deputy chief engineer on duty that night. He's been blamed in every official account. The man who gave the orders, the man who ignored the warnings. But there's another engineer, someone who only identified himself as Mikhail in a series of letters that surfaced years after the disaster. Mikhail worked in Reactor Four's control room. He wasn't supposed to be there that night. A shift change had been delayed. According to his account, something was already wrong hours before the explosion. The readings made no sense, he wrote. We were seeing plasma formations inside the core, not possible with standard operations. Someone was running an experiment we weren't briefed on. Plasma formations. He described instruments showing energy spikes in areas of the reactor that shouldn't have been active. Technicians recalibrating sensors, assuming equipment failure. But the sensors weren't broken. At 2340, we heard the first explosion, small, underground, from beneath the reactor. We looked at each other. That wasn't supposed to happen. The first explosion, not the one at 1:23 a.m. that the world knows about. An explosion 90 minutes earlier, from below the reactor core. Mikhail described chaos in the control room, Dyatlov demanding explanations, phone calls to Moscow that went unanswered, and then orders came down that he still doesn't understand. We were told to proceed with the test after the first explosion. They told us to continue. Mikhail's letters stopped there. He never explained what he saw in those final 90 minutes. He surfaced briefly to deliver those letters to a Western journalist, then disappeared. People who knew him say he's still alive, somewhere in Belarus. He won't talk anymore.
The official Soviet report blamed the RBMK reactor design and operator error. The IAEA accepted this version. It became history. But the radiation readings never quite matched the official timeline. Swedish monitoring stations detected the first radiation spikes at 2 a.m. on April 26th. The explosion officially occurred at 1:23 a.m. The math works, except there are readings, unverified, from Finland and Norway, showing elevated radiation levels beginning around midnight, hours before the main explosion. The Soviets never acknowledged this data. Neither did most Western governments. It's not in the official record. Then there are the seismograph readings. Multiple stations across Europe recorded the main explosion, a 3.0 magnitude event, impossible to miss. But at least 2 stations in Romania and Turkey recorded something else, a smaller seismic event, approximately 2 hours earlier. The records were noted in technical journals, then quietly removed from later compilations. Not deleted, just omitted. Documents obtained through years of requests show something else troubling. The Soviet government had been conducting experimental work at Chernobyl. Not just energy research, military applications, plasma research tied to directed energy weapons. A declassified memo mentions Project Horizon, a joint military-civilian initiative. The details are redacted, but the project was active at Chernobyl in early 1986, 3 months before the explosion. The head of that project was a physicist named Viktor Shcherov. His entire file was classified until 2006. When it was finally released, whole sections had been removed, including anything about his work in 1986. Shecharov died in 1991. Cancer. The official cause. His family says he never spoke about Chernobyl. Not once. Not even at the end. And then there's the evacuation timeline. The official story says authorities waited 36 hours before evacuating Pripyat, a delay that's been criticized ever since. But there are reports, quiet ones, of certain people leaving earlier. Scientists, military personnel, families of high-ranking officials. They left within hours of the explosion, before the official evacuation order. Someone knew. Someone knew this wasn't a simple accident. The photographs from that night tell their own story. There's footage from the first helicopter flyover, filmed by a military crew at dawn on April 26th. They were sent to assess the damage. The reactor building was destroyed. Fire everywhere. That much matches the official account. But there's something else in that footage. The ground beneath the reactor, cracked, fractured in a pattern radiating outward from a point south of the building, like something had pushed up from below. The footage aired once on Soviet television, then was pulled from all archives. For years, it was considered lost. A copy surfaced in 2003, posted online briefly, then removed. But people saved it. Frame 847 shows the fracture pattern clearly. Something exploded underground before the reactor went. The elephant's foot became famous, that mass of corium, melted nuclear fuel that burned through the reactor floor and solidified in the basement, lethally radioactive even today. What's less famous is where they found it. The corium had melted down through multiple levels, but its distribution pattern confused the initial investigators. Some of the material had moved laterally, sideways, as if something had dispersed it before it fully solidified. Valery Legasov, the chief investigating scientist, noted this in his personal tapes, the ones he recorded before his death. The fuel moved in ways inconsistent with gravitational collapse alone, he said. There was force applied, directional force. He never elaborated. He killed himself 2 years after the disaster. His tapes weren't released until decades later. Then there are the radiation readings themselves, the ones that still don't add up. The Soviets reported maximum radiation levels of 300 roentgens per hour in the immediate aftermath. Catastrophic, but within expected parameters for a reactor breach. But there are dosimeter readings from the first responders, firefighters, soldiers. Some of their personal devices showed spikes far higher, over 2,000 roentgens in isolated areas, not near the reactor core, near the southern foundation. Those readings were dismissed as equipment malfunction, but dozens of devices all malfunctioned the same way, all showing the same anomalous spike in the same location? The basement levels beneath Reactor 4 were sealed, completely, within weeks of the disaster. Not just blocked off, filled with concrete, tons of it, poured into spaces that investigators had barely explored. The official reason was structural stability, preventing further collapse. But workers who participated in the sealing operation remember something else. Orders to work quickly, no photography allowed, and the presence of military personnel who weren't there for the other reactors. One worker who requested anonymity described finding something in the lower levels before they sealed everything. He said metal, but wrong. Twisted in ways metal shouldn't twist. Still warm. We were told not to touch it, not to talk about it. He was paid extra for that shift.
triple wages, and ordered to sign a confidentiality agreement that's still in effect.
So, what really happened beneath Reactor 4? The rational explanation is military experimentation gone catastrophically wrong. The Soviets were exploring plasma physics, directed energy applications, perhaps even primitive fusion research. They were using the reactor not just for power, but as cover for weapons development. This fits the historical pattern. The Americans did it at Hanford, the British at Windscale, civilian nuclear facilities hiding military research. Maybe the experiment that night was unauthorized, a test pushed beyond safe parameters. It triggered a plasma discharge that compromised the reactor's lower structures. That was the first explosion, the underground one. Then, with the containment already failing, the operators tried to continue the safety test because Moscow demanded data, because admitting the experiment had failed meant admitting the experiment existed. And 90 minutes later, the reactor itself exploded. This theory explains the secrecy, the sealed records, the witness intimidation. It's Cold War paranoia mixed with nuclear disaster. Unpleasant, but comprehensible. But it doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain the radiation readings from hours before. It doesn't explain the plasma formations Mikhail described. And it doesn't explain why certain areas showed radiation signatures inconsistent with reactor fuel alone. There's another theory, darker, more difficult to accept. What if the Soviets encountered something they didn't understand? For those who remember the late Cold War, there were rumors, whispers about research into exotic physics, zero-point energy, vacuum manipulation, technologies that sound like science fiction but had real money and real scientists behind them. Both superpowers were exploring the edges of physics, desperate for any advantage. And sometimes when you push into the unknown, you find something looking back. What if the plasma experiments at Chernobyl opened a door, created a space where the normal rules didn't apply? The readings showing impossible energy densities, the metal twisted in ways metal shouldn't twist, the desperate sealing of the lower levels. Not to hide weapons research, but to hide something worse. Something they couldn't control, couldn't understand, and absolutely couldn't allow the world to know existed. This theory has historical precedent, even if we don't want to acknowledge it. The Philadelphia experiment, the Soviet experiments with psychotronics, projects that started with legitimate physics and ended in classified terror. History doesn't usually forget triumph, it forgets failure. But there's a third possibility, one that keeps some researchers awake at night. What if there was no experiment at all? What if something was already there, beneath Chernobyl, beneath the reactor, something old, something dormant, and the reactor, operating for years, feeding it energy unknowingly, finally woke it up? This sounds insane. It is insane. But there are details that don't fit anything else. The fracture patterns pointing to a source beneath the reactor, the early radiation spikes, the plasma formations appearing before any test was conducted, and the fact that the Soviets chose that location for a nuclear facility in the first place. The site had been surveyed extensively before construction, multiple geological surveys, environmental assessments, all classified, all still classified. What did those surveys show? What was beneath Chernobyl that made the Soviets decide to build a reactor there anyway? 39 years have passed since that night. The official story remains unchanged. Human error, design flaws, a tragic accident. But the gaps remain. The sealed archives, the missing footage, the basement levels buried under concrete for reasons that still aren't fully explained. And the people who were there, the ones still alive, they don't talk. Not because they forgot, but because they can't, or won't, or were told not to. It's not about what's there, it's about what's not. There's no complete record of what experiments were being conducted, no full list of military personnel present that night, no explanation for the early seismic readings or the radiation spikes that shouldn't exist. The absence of evidence becomes evidence itself. And then there are the behavioral changes, the witnesses who survived. Many died young. Cancer, heart failure, the expected consequences of radiation exposure, but others lived. Anatoly Datlov lived until 1995. Mikhail, if he's still alive, is somewhere in hiding. Other engineers and technicians are scattered across former Soviet states. They could speak. Some of them have no legal restrictions anymore. The Soviet Union is gone. The confidentiality agreements are unenforceable. But they stay silent. That silence means something. When the Berlin Wall fell, secrets spilled out. When the Soviet Union collapsed, archives opened. We learned about gulags, show trials, secret police operations. But Chernobyl? The full truth about Chernobyl remains locked away. Russia still classifies documents related to the disaster. Ukraine has tried to open its archives but found records missing or destroyed. International agencies accept the official version because questioning it raises questions no one wants to answer. What was really happening at Chernobyl? What was Project Horizon? What did they find in those basement levels? And why, decades later, do governments still refuse to discuss it? The Chernobyl exclusion zone remains off-limits, officially because of radiation, but large areas within the zone show background radiation levels comparable to normal environments. Yet access is still restricted, still controlled, still monitored. What are they protecting? Or what are they keeping contained? In 2019, a FOIA request in the United States turned up something unexpected. A CIA briefing document from 1987. Most of it was redacted, but one line remained visible. Chernobyl incident confirms capabilities exceed initial assessments. Recommend increased monitoring of similar Soviet facilities. Capabilities, not failures. Capabilities. What capability did Chernobyl confirm? The document was posted on a declassification forum. It remained online for 3 days, then disappeared. The CIA claims no record of its release, but researchers saved copies. They're still analyzing what little information survived the redactions. In 2023, a Reddit thread appeared. Someone claiming to be the grandson of a Chernobyl engineer. He posted photographs, documents in Russian, diagrams showing reactor modifications not in the official schematics. The thread was active for 6 hours, then deleted. The account vanished. No one has been able to verify who posted it, or why they chose to come forward after so long. But the question remains, hanging in the air like fallout, invisible, persistent, dangerous. What exploded beneath Reactor 4 on April 26, 1986? And why are they still hiding the answer?